private dining room at Bellissimo had been reserved for 3 months. My mother's 60th birthday was supposed to be perfect. 23 family members gathered around Italian marble tables, fresh orchids at every place setting, soft lighting that made everyone look younger and happier than they actually were. My sister Jessica had spent the better part of an hour describing the planning process to anyone who would listen, her voice carrying that particular pitch of someone who needed you to know just how much effort she'd put in, just how essential she was to making everything beautiful. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the gray dress my mother had once called mousy, in a tone that suggested she was being helpful. My parents barely glanced up when I entered. My father was showing my brother-in-law his new golf clubs, explaining the technology in the driver with the enthusiasm he reserved for expensive purchases. My mother was admiring Jessica's car key fob, like it was a piece of fine jewelry. Fully loaded, Jessica announced for what I suspected was the third time that evening. Leather seats, panoramic sunroof, the works. Eric and I decided we deserved something nice. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, next to my cousin's 9-year-old son, who was absorbed in his tablet and clearly thrilled about being at a fancy adult dinner. The seating chart had been strategically planned, according to Jessica, which apparently meant positioning me as far from the birthday girl as physically possible while still being in the same room. I was used to it. Being the family afterthought was a role I'd occupied for so long it had worn grooves into my sense of self, the way water wears down stone. Uncle Tom arrived 20 minutes late, slightly out of breath, his tie askew in a way that suggested he'd been hurrying. He was my father's younger brother, a patent attorney in Silicon Valley who visited Boston maybe twice a year. We'd stayed in touch mostly through email. Long, detailed conversations about obscure intellectual property law questions I'd had during my work. Discussions he seemed to genuinely enjoy. Sorry, he said, kissing my mother's cheek before scanning the table. His face lit up when he spotted me. Emma, there you are. He practically jogged to my end of the table, ignoring the empty seat beside my father that had been carefully reserved for him with a place card and everything. Uncle Tom? I said, standing to hug him. He squeezed my shoulders, then settled into the chair next to me that had been meant for my cousin's husband. So, he said, his voice warm with genuine interest. How's life after that $3.8 million patent sale? I told my partners about your moisture detection coating technology. Brilliant work, Emma. Just brilliant. The room didn't just go quiet. It went silent in that specific way that makes your ears ring, that makes you acutely aware of every small sound. The clink of ice in water glasses, someone's breathing, the distant clatter of kitchen staff. Jessica's mouth was open mid-word, her story about her Honda's Bluetooth connectivity dying on her lips. My brother-in-law's wine glass paused halfway to his mouth, suspended in the air like he'd forgotten how arms worked. My father's hand froze on his water glass. My mother's face went through a remarkable journey, confusion, recognition, something that might have been panic, and finally a desperate attempt. At a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. What patent? She whispered, but somehow her voice carried to every corner of the room. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the moment breathe. Uncle Tom, blissfully unaware of the bomb he'd just detonated, continued with the enthusiasm of someone discussing something he found genuinely exciting. The agricultural applications alone are game-changing. And the licensing deals you structured, Emma, you're going to revolutionize crop management in drought-prone regions. The preliminary data from the field tests is extraordinary. You sold a patent, my father said slowly, each word carefully pronounced, like he was trying to understand a foreign language, for $3.8 million. Last April, I said simply. To Agrotech Solutions. The deal closed on the 15th. Last April? My mother's voice had gone very small. She was gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles had gone white. That's almost a year ago. 11 months, I confirmed. Jessica found her voice, though it came out higher than usual, strained. You're lying. You work at a library. I'm a research chemist at Dendrite Solutions, I said, keeping my tone neutral, factual. I've been there for 6 years. The library job was during my PhD program. That ended in 2019. But you told us, my mother started. I never told you I worked at a library, I interrupted gently. When I mentioned my research position at Dendrite, you said, "That's nice, dear," and changed the subject to Jessica's promotion to assistant manager at Target. I stopped correcting the assumption after the third family dinner. It seemed easier to just let you believe what you wanted to believe. Uncle Tom was looking between us now, awareness finally dawning on his face. "Wait," he said slowly. They didn't know?" "No." "What?" my father demanded, his voice rising slightly. "What is this? Our daughter has apparently been living some secret life?" "Secret?" I set down my wine glass carefully. "I sent you both an invitation to my PhD graduation. I mailed you a copy of my dissertation, bound, with a personal note inside. I emailed you when I got the job at Dendrite. I called when my first patent was approved." I paused, remembering. "You told me you were busy with Jessica's housewarming party, and could we talk later? We never did." "A PhD?" My mother's voice had gone very small. "You have a doctorate?" "Materials Science and Chemical Engineering, MIT, graduated summa cum laude." I turned to Uncle Tom. "Thank you for asking about the patent, by the way. The licensing revenue is exceeding projections. We're looking at an additional $1.2 million over the next 3 years from the secondary applications." My cousin Rachel, seated midway down the table, started laughing. Not polite laughter. Actual gasping, doubled-over laughter that made her husband put a concerned hand on her back. "I'm sorry," she managed between breaths, wiping her eyes. "I'm so sorry. But, Aunt Helen, you told me last Christmas that Emma was finally holding down a steady job shelving books. You said it with a straight face. I thought—" She dissolved into laughter again. My mother looked at my father helplessly, like he might have an explanation that would make this make sense. "You thought wrong," Uncle Tom said. And there was an edge to his voice now, his lawyer voice emerging. "Emma's patent has been featured in 3 industry journals. She gave a keynote speech at the International Polymer Conference in Geneva last fall. I assumed you were bursting with pride." The waiter appeared with appetizers, creating a moment of forced normalcy as plates were distributed with professional efficiency. No one touched their food. If this story is resonating with you, please, take a moment to share it. Your support helps me continue bringing these stories to life. And stay with me, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs to be heard. Jessica recovered first, pivoting with the smooth desperation of someone trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled away from them. "Well, that's great, Emma," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "But money isn't everything. Eric and I are focusing on work-life balance. My promotion to senior assistant manager comes with real leadership responsibilities. Training, new hires, managing inventory, scheduling." "That sounds fulfilling," I said, and I meant it sincerely. "More fulfilling than just selling some patent and coasting," she added, her smile sharp around the edges. Uncle Tom made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Emma's not coasting," he said. "She's currently heading the development team for a biodegradable plastic alternative. The preliminary results are extraordinary. If it works at scale, and early indications suggest it will, we're looking at a potential environmental revolution." "We?" my father asked. "My firm handles Emma's IP portfolio," Uncle Tom explained. "We've been working together since her 2nd year of graduate school. She has 4 patents currently in application, 3 already approved and licensed, and 2 more in development." He paused, and I could see him doing the math in his head about how much to reveal. The $3.8 million sale was actually her smallest deal. I watched my mother's face carefully. She was doing mental math too. I could see it happening behind her eyes, the numbers adding up to something she couldn't quite process. "You're smallest," she managed. "The moisture detection coating had limited applications," I explained. "Primarily agricultural. The previous patent, the self-healing polymer compound, licensed for $6.2 million to 3 different manufacturers. But that was spread over a longer timeline, so the individual payments were smaller." Jessica's face had gone blotchy, red creeping up her neck the way it always did when she was upset. "You expect us to believe you've made over $10 million? "Not made," I corrected. "Licensed. And the total is closer to $14.7 million when you include the royalty structures and consulting fees. Though after taxes and legal fees, the actual amount is lower. Still substantial, but lower." The silence this time was different. Heavier. My brother-in-law Eric cleared his throat. "So when Jessica told you last year that you should really think about getting a real job with benefits, you told me I was wasting my potential," I said, looking directly at Jessica. "You said I was 31 years old with nothing to show for it. You suggested I apply at the Target where you work because you could put in a good word for me with the hiring manager." "I was trying to help," Jessica said weakly. "You were trying to feel superior," Rachel interjected, her laughter gone now, her voice flat. "We all watched you do it. Every single family gathering, you'd find some way to mention Emma's struggles while talking about your management training." My father set down his fork with a sharp click. "Why didn't you tell us?" he demanded. "I did tell you," I said. "Repeatedly, for years. You weren't interested in listening." "That's not fair," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We've always supported you." Uncle Tom actually snorted, a sound so unlike his usual composed demeanor that several people turned to stare. "Helen, with respect," he said, "I've been at family dinners where you've introduced Emma as our other daughter, while spending 20 minutes bragging about Jessica's retail career. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, you didn't even mention Emma in your gratitude toast. My mother's protest died in her throat. When Emma called to tell me about the agrotech deal," Uncle Tom continued, his voice gentler now but no less pointed. "She was crying. Not from happiness. She was crying because she'd just tried to tell you both about the preliminary offer, and you put her on speakerphone while watching Jessica's kids' soccer game. You said, 'That's nice, honey,' and hung up without asking a single question. I remembered that call. I'd been standing in my apartment, looking at the offer letter, wanting desperately to share the moment with my parents. The dial tone after they'd hung up had felt like a physical thing, a weight settling on my chest. "We didn't know it was important," my father said, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes. A $3.8 million offer wasn't important enough to have your full attention, Uncle Tom asked quietly. Jessica pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. "This is Mom's birthday dinner," she said, her voice tight. "Can we not do this now?" "You're right," I said, standing as well. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, setting it in front of my mother. "Happy birthday, Mom." She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a check for $50,000. "What is this?" She whispered. "A gift," I said. "I thought about what you might need. Dad mentioned wanting to renovate the kitchen last year. This should cover it." "We can't accept this," my father said, but his eyes were locked on the check, on the numbers that represented more money than he made in a year. "You can," I said. "It's a gift, no strings attached. Despite everything, you're still my parents." My mother started crying. Real tears, not the delicate ones she produced for sympathy at church functions. "Emma," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to." "Make me feel invisible," I supplied gently. I know you didn't mean to, but you did. We can fix this, my father said urgently, leaning forward. We'll do better. We'll listen. I sat back down, and Uncle Tom squeezed my shoulder supportively. I'd like that, I said, but it requires actual change, not just promises made at a birthday dinner because you're embarrassed. Rachel raised her glass, and there was something fierce in her eyes. To Emma, she said. The most successful person at this table, and the one who's been treated the worst. Rachel, my mother protested. Am I wrong? Rachel challenged, looking around the table. Anyone? Someone want to argue that Emma hasn't been ignored and dismissed? At every family gathering for the past decade. No one spoke. The waiter returned, asking if everything was all right with the appetizers. The question hung in the air with unintentional irony. Everything's fine, I said. Could I get the pappardelle? Bolognese for my main course, please? Slowly, others began ordering. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted, like a bone that had been set after years of healing wrong. Uncle Tom stayed beside me for the rest of the evening, occasionally adding details about my work that my parents absorbed with visible shock. Jessica barely spoke, pushing food around her plate, her earlier brightness completely extinguished. Eric kept glancing between his wife and me like he was watching a tennis match and couldn't predict who would win. During the main course, my father asked, "What are you working on now?" It was the first time he'd asked about my work in over 5 years. I told him about the biodegradable plastic project, about the team I was leading, 8 brilliant researchers, all of them passionate about environmental impact, about the potential to replace petroleum-based plastics in packaging, about the breakdown timeline, about the industrial composting applications. He listened, actually listened, asking follow-up questions that showed he was processing the information, trying to understand. My mother kept looking at the check, then at me, then back at the check, like she was trying to reconcile the number with the daughter she'd dismissed. When dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation with sparklers that made everyone's faces glow, Jessica made one final attempt. "Well, Mom," she said, her voice determinedly cheerful. "What do you think of your party?" My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said slowly, "I think I've been a terrible mother to one of my daughters." Jessica flinched. "Both of you," my mother corrected, looking between us. "Emma, I failed you by not seeing you." "Jessica, I failed you by letting you build your identity on being better than your sister, when your sister was succeeding beyond anything I understood. It wasn't a complete reckoning. It wasn't a movie-perfect reconciliation. But it was honest. And, sometimes, honesty is all you can ask for." After dinner, as people filed out into the cool November air, my father pulled me aside. "The kitchen renovation," he said. Could we hire you as a consultant? I want to pick materials you'd recommend. I want to understand what you do." "I design polymers, Dad. Not kitchens." "I know," he said. "But you understand materials. Properties, durability, environmental impact." I thought. He trailed off, looking older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper in the parking lot lights. "I thought maybe you could teach me something about what you do." It was a start. Small, but a start. Uncle Tom drove me home. In the car, he said, "You handled that with remarkable grace." Did I have a choice? "You had several choices," he said. "You chose the kind one. That says something about who you are." 3 weeks later, I received an email from my mother. No subject line. Just, "I framed your diploma. It's hanging in the living room now. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you received it. A small thing. But small things accumulate, like compound interest, like layers of sediment building into stone." My father called the following Tuesday, asking about carbon fiber composites for a backyard project he was planning. The project was obviously a manufactured excuse to talk. I explained the material properties anyway. We talked for 47 minutes. Jessica sent a text message 2 months later. "I'm sorry I was threatened by your success. I'm working on it in therapy." I responded, "I'm sorry I let you think we were in competition. We never were." The kitchen renovation began in May. My parents consulted me on every material choice: countertops, backsplash, flooring, asking questions that showed they were actually trying to understand my work, to see the world through my eyes. My mother started attending lectures at the local community college on environmental science, forwarding me articles she thought I'd find interesting, asking questions that showed she'd actually read them. At Jessica's birthday dinner in July, my mother introduced me as Dr. Emma Richardson, our daughter, the research chemist. She said it with pride that sounded genuine. Then she spent an equal amount of time talking about Jessica's promotion to department manager. Balance. Not perfect, but progress. Uncle Tom and I had lunch the week after Jessica's party. "How does it feel?" he asked, cutting into his sandwich. "Strange," I admitted. "I spent so long being invisible that being seen feels almost uncomfortable, like I'm taking up too much space." "You'll adjust," he said. "You're brilliant at adapting. It's one of your strengths." The biodegradable plastic project received preliminary approval for large-scale testing in September. My team celebrated with champagne in the lab, plastic cups raised high, everyone talking over each other with the giddy excitement of people who've worked toward something for years and finally see it within reach. I took a photo and sent it to the family group chat. My mother responded within minutes, asking questions about the science. Jessica sent a congratulations GIF. My father called that evening asking me to explain the project from the beginning. I did. 40 minutes of polymer chains and molecular bonds and environmental impact assessments. He listened to the entire explanation without once changing the subject. In November, I received an invitation to speak at an environmental summit in Stockholm. The speaking fee was $35,000. I accepted, then forwarded the invitation to my parents with a note. "If you're interested in attending, I'd like to buy your tickets." They both came. They sat in the front row during my keynote speech, my mother in the navy dress she reserved for important occasions, my father in a suit I'd never seen before. When I finished speaking, the auditorium rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. My mother cried through all of it. At the airport heading home, my father said, "I missed so much of your life." "Yes," I agreed. There was no point in softening it. "Can I be there for the rest of it?" I thought about the years of being overlooked, the dismissals, the casual cruelty of being forgotten in the same room you occupied. I thought about the check I'd given my mother, which they'd never cashed. Instead, they'd framed it next to my diploma with a plaque reading, "Given with more grace than we deserved." I thought about the choice between holding on to pain and allowing space for change. "Yes," I said, "you can be there for the rest of it." It wasn't perfect. Jessica and I still had awkward moments, conversations that didn't quite land right, old patterns that tried to reassert themselves. My parents still occasionally defaulted to old habits, catching themselves mid-sentence and apologizing, course-correcting, in real time. But they were trying. Actually trying. On Christmas, Uncle Tom raised a toast. "To Emma," he said, "who taught us all that the quietest person in the room might be the most accomplished." "And to second chances," my mother added, quietly, her hand finding my father's. I raised my glass, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "To family," I said. "The complicated, messy, imperfect kind that does the work to be better." The patents kept coming. The projects kept succeeding. The biodegradable plastic went into production, then into stores, then into the hands of companies replacing their petroleum-based packaging. But the real victory was smaller, harder to quantify. It was in the phone calls where my father asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. In the articles my mother sent with genuine curiosity. In Jessica's texts that no longer felt like a competition she needed to win. I had spent years being invisible, a ghost in my own family. Now I was seen. Not for the money or the patents or the keynote speeches, but for the person I'd always been, finally recognized by the people who should have seen me all along. The revenge, if it could be called that, wasn't in the revelation at my mother's birthday dinner. It was in the grace I'd shown afterward, in refusing to let their failures define me, in building a life so full and meaningful that their oversight became their loss, not mine, and in the end, in giving them the chance to realize what they'd almost lost forever, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to punish people for their blindness, but to let them finally see. Thank you for staying with me through Emma's journey. If her story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, unseen worth, and the grace it takes to forgive without forgetting. Until next time, remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. Keep building. Keep shining. Keep being exactly who you are.